Alright, this set of notes is going to be about the nematodes and then a little bit about the rotifers. Our domain is still the same one as the eukarya. Our kingdom still the same one that we've been in now for a little while. It's the kingdom Animalia. And the phylums are these two terms, the phylum Nematoda and the phylum Rotifera. We're not going to break these down into the different classes and definitely not into any of the other classification schemes. We're just going to stay right there at this phylum level, the nematodes and the rotifers. First up, we're going to be talking here about the nematoda. We'll go over the general characteristics of the organisms in this particular phylum, and then I'm going to give you just a few examples of a couple different ones and what makes them a little bit more unique. So these guys are what we call the roundworms, which is a little bit different than that platyhelminthe group, those flatworms. These guys are round. Okay? So that's going to give you a little bit of information. They're cylindrical, like I said, that round, but one of the unique things is that they come to a taper at both ends. And you can see this taper here at this end and then starting to come down a little bit at this other end here. For the lifestyle for these particular organisms, they are very rarely seen. They do live in sediment, in soil. They live inside organisms as parasites, but they're typically very small, and they're just not usually some of those organisms that humans can encounter very often. There's about 80,000 species. And sometimes in certain areas of the world, the tropical rainforest, for example, scientists have been able to take a spoonful, about a tablespoonful of the soil, and get tens of thousands of these individual worms in that one spoonful of that really rich soil. So about 80,000 different species, like I mentioned before, free, living, and parasitic for all of these organisms. In the marine environment, most all marine organisms have parasites. These guys are some of those particular parasites that they have. In humans, there's about 50 different species that we are hosts for that will live inside of us as a parasite. Their symmetry, you can kind of get an idea by looking at this picture up here of one of these individuals. They are bilaterally symmetrical, so that tells you a couple things. Number one, and most important, it tells you that they are in fact cephalized. For their skeletal system, these are another type of worm, so they do not have a hard exo or endoskeleton. These guys use that hydrostatic skeleton, but they have a unique structure on the outside of the organism called a cuticle. Yes, just like on our fingernails, at the edges, we have a cuticle right here. And this cuticle that is on our fingernails is kind of soft but still tough. They have that same type of structure. It's these proteins that are being made that protects the outside of the organism, yet it gives them some flexibility at the same time. Their body cavity here, picture of that body cavity, I was talking about it in our last set of notes that like similar to these organisms, 3 body layers. So we have that ectoderm on the outside, we have the mesoderm, and then we have the endoderm. So those 3 layers. But because these guys are round, they form a little bit better tube within a tube, like we are a tube within a tube. So they have that outer layer here. Then they have the mesoderm that's kind of this orangish coloring here. And then they have this tube on the inside. Well, where this tube is, that's the endoderm. So that's their gut. So an opening, and then it travels all the way through like for us. But they have space around that gut. It's not what we call a true coelom. This is a pseudo-coelom. And pseudo-coelom is spelled P-S-E-U. So that's P-S-E-U-D-O-C-O-E-L. Pseudo-coelom, O-M at the end. So these are what we call pseudo-coelomate. A way to think about it is pseudo is the prefix for fake. not real. So these are the pseudocoelomate or fake body cavity organisms. They have some space. But what's the difference between a real and a fake body cavity? It's just a big space in there, right? Well, the difference is that these particular organisms do not have mesoderm, the cells that produce muscle on both sides of that body cavity. They just have it on one side, towards the outside of the organism. So we have this ectoderm, the outside. We have the mesoderm, which is producing the muscles. There's a space, and then there's the endoderm. So when these particular organisms ingest some food, they have to actually move back and forth to get that food to travel through their intestinal system. Their digestive process requires them to move. For us, it's different. We have muscle surrounding our intestinal system, the endoderm cells. And then we have space, and then we have more muscle, our skeletal muscle. So these particular organisms are a little bit different than us, and that difference is where that mesoderm actually is compared to that body cavity. So we call these the pseudocoelomate organisms. Now that digestive system that I have been mentioning here a little bit is different than that of the flatworms. One of those things that makes these guys unique, they have a digestive system with, wait for it, 2 openings. That's right, they have a mouth and an anus. These are the first, that is the simplest organisms, these Nematoda, that have a one-way gut with 2 openings, the first with the mouth and an anus. None of the other organisms that we've talked about so far have those particular structures. So the anterior side, in this particular picture, that's this side over here, is where the food enters, and the posterior side, this side down here, is where the food, or the waste, is eliminated. So a little bit about some of these parasitic marine nematodes. One of the most common is called Anisakis. That's the genus name for these guys. A couple pictures. Here's some Anisakis here. Not very large, but the adults, that is the primary host, will be seals and dolphins, some mammals that are in the marine environment. That's the primary host for this particular worm. It's where the adult Anisakis will be living. Their larva is actually living in the flesh of fish, which the seals and dolphins are eating. So the seals and dolphins have the larva embedded in their muscle. The fish have the larva embedded in their muscle. The seals and dolphins eat the fish. The seals and dolphins' digestive system breaks open the larva, and the larva can then burrow its way or move its way into the intestine of the seals and the dolphins. Here's a picture of that larva. You can see it here in the meat of this fish. It's just curled up right in there. There's another one kind of all curled up, waiting for a mammal to eat them. And guess what? We can get these guys ourselves when we eat things like sashimi or ceviche, raw fish. One of the reasons why raw fish can potentially cause humans to get sick. Usually when we eat these guys, we cough them up or throw them up, and we don't have too many issues. But sometimes they can actually penetrate the stomach wall or the intestinal wall, and that causes ulcer-like problems if we get these into our bodies. Ulcers are holes in our digestive system that leak our digestive fluids, enzymes, acid, etc., into our coelom, that body cavity. Another kind is called Ascaris, and we'll take a look at an Ascaris in a lab that we're going to be doing with these guys. Ascaris is very similar to the Anisakis, but this one's on land mostly. It lives in the intestines of pigs. Here's some, and you can see these guys are packed into the intestine here of this pig. They're in horses, of course. They're in human, and these guys will feed on food that is being eaten by their hosts, passing through the gut. It's interesting that the Ascaris worm females can reach about a foot long, so that's a significant size for one of these particular worms. The females can produce probably right around 200,000 eggs every single day, which is a crazy number of eggs for one female to be producing. Those eggs are released in feces. They then, as fertilizer, can actually remain alive in the soil for years. 5 to 10 years, we've actually seen these Ascaris eggs staying viable. When an organism then eats these particular eggs, that activates them, and the larvae will bore their way into the bloodstream, develop in the lungs. Then we cough them up out of the lungs as young worms and swallow them into the intestine where they live. It's a very, very, very unique way of getting into the particular place that they need to be to survive. They use their host's actual body functions to move them around correctly. Those are two of the most common ones, the Anisakis in the marine environment and the Ascaris here on land. The next group here is the phylum Rotifera, the rotifers. Their lifestyle is a little bit unique. We're not going to talk a ton about these, but they're actually relatively common on land. They are free living, so they don't act as parasites. Nice to get away from the parasites just a little bit. These guys do live in the water, but they typically are found in freshwater, ponds, lakes, streams. They are very, very, very small. We'll look at some under the microscope, take a look at how small these guys are, but extraordinarily small. One of the unique things about the rotifers here is a pretty good picture of one, is that they can survive for extraordinarily long periods without water. So when there's drought conditions, these guys will actually dry up, look like a little teeny grain of sand. When the water comes back, they'll absorb the water through that wonderful process of osmosis, and their body systems will begin working again as if they were in kind of a hibernation type of situation. Their symmetry, they are bilaterally symmetrical. They have cephalization. They have that distinctive head region up here. These guys, for their body cavity, just like the rotifers, or the nematodes, the rotifers also have that pseudocoelom. So they are pseudocoelomate organisms. That is, they have the fake coelom. Ectoderm, mesoderm, little body cavity space, and then that endoderm cells. For their nervous system is located mostly up here in that head region. They have cerebral ganglia. And the unique thing that these guys have is 2 eye spots. And you can see one of them is right here. Again, similar to those planaria, those eye spots are for sensing light and dark. A digestive system for these particular organisms want to spend a little time on because it's very unique, and it leads us into some of the digestive systems of other organisms that we'll be talking about. They do have a mouth, and their mouth is located right up here. It's a little bit easier to see in the drawing portion. The mouth is right here, and this mouth is surrounded by these 2 what they call crowns of cilia. And it is these 2 kind of, looks like rotating wheels as the cilia move back and forth from the cells that are up here surrounding the mouth. They're actually kind of spinning like this, sweeping any particles of food down into the mouth. The next section that they have, where they're sweeping things like bacteria and diatoms and just little pieces of organic material that they can kind of get into the organism. It goes through the mouth, and it moves into what we call the mastax, which here it's this kind of tan-colored area. Over here, can't really see the mastax so well, but it's right in this particular area. An important one, make sure you put some stars next to mastax, M-A-S-T-A-X. The mastax is a muscular organ that mashes up the food. So it kind of acts in a way sort of like our jaws do. As the food gets swept into the mouth, the mastax mashes up those food items into smaller particles. And then it moves through the, what they have kind of this stomach-like area. That's kind of this area right over here. And then there's some intestine. That's the area right here in yellow. It's the intestine. So mastax, a stomach, and intestine. And then it goes into an area after the anus called the cloaca. C-L-O-A-C-A, cloaca. And the cloaca is a chamber that collects the waste products from digestion. It actually collects all the respiratory and any other excretory items, urine, ammonia, those type of things. And the cloaca, same structure as in birds, is where everything empties out of. So that's a unique structure that these particular organisms use to get rid of things out of the body, whether it's sperm or eggs, whether it's waste products from food, or waste products from other bodily processes, like I mentioned before, like that nitrogen and urea. So those are the rotifers. Not a ton about these guys, but having that mastax in this digestive system leads to other organisms having those particular structures as well. And that's all for the notes on the Nematoda and Rotifera. We'll be learning a little bit more about these guys in class this week.